Hello, 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 and welcome into episode 5 of the Bear Claw Media Podcast. I am Chris Bolin, joined as always by Ben Schleiger. How you doing tonight, buddy?
Oh, not too bad, Chris. Just enjoying a wild weekend of football again. Our game wasn't so wild, but several around us were pretty spicy.
Yeah, it feels weird that Colorado is like the center of like the pop culture universe. It feels like this weekend The Rock was in town, uh Stephen A was in town. About every college football show was down in Boulder.
Right?
It's
Half a dozen different rap artists were on the sideline. It was just wild. I mean, McAfee was in town, first take, like just an absolute, onslaught of celebrities. It was Lewis Reddick, really said it pretty spot on in the opening of their broadcast there. As I don't know if we're having a football game or a BET Awards, but I think we're having both tonight.
Yeah, CSU almost completely spoiled the party. It
Oh man,
looked
they should have won that game so many times, but Neon Dion, got his crew all psyched up, and they came in for the fight, and they found how to finish it. I don't think they should have. I think if you look at the penalty yards, this is insane. I don't know where it ranks, but it must be pretty high, at least in CSU's history. They had 179 penalty yards. Maybe it was 172, but it was way too much. Like literally, what sometimes we throw for was their just penalty yards.
they just gave that up.
Oh,
Yeah, I watched the Broncos game today. I should say it's about 8 p.m. on Sunday night. We're recording here. I went over to a couple of buddies' houses who graduated from CSU, and it was a weird atmosphere because they were like generally happy with how the game went because I think a good chunk of them expected it to be over by halftime, but they were just that typical like little brother of course after all that, like of course they still
hmm
end up winning.
yeah, just a fitting ending to it. It's like they pulled every trick out of the book, whether it was right or wrong, and they took out Travis Hunter, whether it was headhunting or not, and
It's like
their
rib
quarterback
hunting.
was electric. That freshman was on fire. It seemed like he wasn't going to miss anything important, but those 3 picks, 4 picks at the end of the night just took him out of the contention. But yeah, props to CSU. I mean, count us as probably kids. I guess we got our sunglasses and hats on indoors. Don't sue us, Coach Prime. But good for everybody involved. I think CSU gets a little bit more respect, and CU gets to stay undefeated.
Yeah, I feel like public perception on CU kind of dropped a good chunk yesterday. I saw the Oregon spread is 19 and a half, I think, if
Oh,
not pushed up to 20 by now for two top 25 teams. Oregon favored by about 3 touchdowns. That's I
well,
don't
hey,
I
CSU was favored was underdog by 3 touchdowns, and it came out to second overtime. So who knows what they'll do next week?
touche. Shit. Well, I guess we should probably get into what we came here to talk about. All right, UNC. Actually, it feels weird to call it a strong showing when you lose by 64-21, but I felt generally pretty positive coming away from that game. Offense was able to move the ball a little bit, which has really not been the case in the first couple weeks. Gained a little momentum, had some things going. Washington State's offense was just too much for UNC to handle from the get go. But what any broad takeaways from that, Ben? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, it was a slow start. We were a little bit worried about our spread when we opened up the second quarter. Like, oh man, this is tough. Um, we did get thrown around a little bit. They did just have more downhill running. It was some physicality we were not not prepared for and did not have the arms to handle with. But outside of that, once they they didn't switch that many starters out. So honestly, like not until like probably fourth quarter is when we really saw a lot of backups, like um, the big time edge that they had. Um, Stone Jr. He was in there until mid third quarter, trying to get him some stats and whatnot. I think overall UNC did a good job. 21 is above what we've scored the rest of the year, so it gives us a lot of confidence in that. I mean, that could have been more, but we had a weird decision to punt and on a 4th and 7 when we were like on the fringe of like the 35 on their side. So I feel like we left some points on the board for sure, but the takeaways that we did have were pretty good. Got a pop up interception, and we put 21 points on backup FBS players. In the Power Five, or as long as Pac-12 is going to last. We can say our boys can say that they hung 21 on a top ranked team. So good for them. Lots to learn, but we did have something to take away from it.
Yeah, you mentioned it was a bit of a slow start. Washington State was up 21-0, felt like before we could blink. But yeah, just weren't able to move the ball till kind of in that second quarter. That's been a bit of a theme this year. There's a 3-and-out to start this game, 3-and-out to start the Abilene Christian game, and then that first drive against Incarnate Word ended in an interception. So I'm sure the Bears are going to hope to be able to get a little more going early next week against Idaho State. But once they were able to move the ball, it felt good. Like got their first points end of the first half, which has happened a couple times now, and then they were just even on drives they didn't score. Like you mentioned, they got some yards, picked up some first downs. Yeah, that punt like late in the fourth quarter, I felt like a weird call, but it wasn't going to matter one way or another. But they had a couple big chunk gains too, which was nice to see, and that's felt like more of a theme as the years gone on. I don't know if it's a point of emphasis, but um, couple jump balls that Sermon threw up. One of them was a touchdown to Stewart. Was it? I think that was at the end of the first half. But it just felt good to actually have some offensive progress being made. It feels like.
Yeah, Jamari Robinson was the one at the end of the second quarter that
Yeah.
we got, and then we also had Hank Gibbs. He ran it in for a 1 yard score in the third, and we had Darius Stewart had that sick screenplay for 52 yards from Sermon. I think the biggest takeaway is even though Washington State was kind of settling in, kind of relaxing in their week 3 win, is that it was nice to see the running backs involved. The screenplay for a big break, a lot of that was on Stewart and just like his playmaking ability to make it all the way down there. Afari got really involved. He got some long runs in there, picked up some good first downs for us. It was nice to see a 100-yard rusher for first time in what seems like a while. I mean, I know we had, Easy Dot, going ham for us last year, but yeah, I mean, let's be honest. It's been a while since we've seen a carry the rock consistently type running back. So 17 carries for 117 yards. That was nice to see. Darius Stewart had 3 catches for 65 yards, including that 52-yarder in the fourth quarter that he broke loose. It was nice to see that we really established the run. I think we wanted to see that a lot earlier in the game, but we kept on getting mauled in the middle, so it was hard to go anywhere with that. I mean, like you try to go in your bread and butter spot that should get you a 2 to 3 yard gain, and it just wasn't happening early on. It was nice to see that later on it opened up a little bit.
Yeah, and this, like you mentioned, this was the first time all season that Afari or Stewart were really able to put together any chunk plays. Afari had back-to-back long carries in the third quarter, just about 30 yards on both of those. Um, but yeah, it's got to be encouraging for the O line, who's been quite frankly getting pushed around a good chunk earlier in the year, to be able to open up some holes for those guys to run through.
Yeah, and
Sweet.
it was nice that with our defense that we did allow a lot of big plays, and a lot of their players were just supremely athletic compared to what we were ready for. Nothing against our guys. It's just they had breakaway speed that if you didn't have a hand on them early, it wasn't going to happen. So it was nice to see that we kind of kept the shape of the defense later in the game, but it was pretty tough to watch some of the just the wide open zones where Ward's dance around for 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds, and he just plunks it right in the zone where our guy fell down. Looks like there might have been some cleat issues. Maybe we didn't have the right cleat on for that day. We saw several guys stumble around, but at the end of the day, we did have a little bit better coverage than normal. It was just those big times where if there was a scoring opportunity, Cam Ward found it.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit, and Lamb mentioned it throughout the week. Keeping the shape of the defense, they struggled with that a little bit last week, when Zach Calzada was able to kind of dance around back there and reverse field and just find a lot of open space. It happened a couple times again today where, like you mentioned, Cam Ward had like a ton of time. And what are you going to do really against a Power Five offensive line? Rushing four, you probably don't expect to get a ton of pressure. Again, David Hogue, that would help a bunch. Getting him back, which may be something to look forward to next week. It makes sense he didn't come back today. Why risk it in a game where you're going to want to compete? But the ones that matter are coming up next week. And
Yeah, I
then
mean, like there wasn't any point in risking him this week, and as far as we keep on hearing, it's week to week, so that could really mean anything. But it would make sense if he came back for Idaho State. That way, he can open up against a little bit easier opponent per se, just a little bit more, a little bit more his speed. Not so much having to worry about the run game. With Idaho State committing to the pass so hard, like you said, Cody Hawkins committed to at the beginning of the season. It would be really nice to see him come back next week.
all right, so a couple notes from this one before we move on, because there's not really a ton to say. Um, Yeah, Washington State's offense, they were doing just about anything they wanted. 43 first half points. That's the most for the Cougars since 2018. Nine players had a catch by halftime. Finished That number finished at 12. Lincoln Victor was kind of the main guy. He had six catches for 119 yards and two touchdowns, and he also dropped an easy one. I think it was in the second half, kind of just a lob pass over, wide open in the back of the end zone over the defender. I think he got distracted, didn't look it in or something. Um, all game, Washington State was running that weird 2-point conversion formation, that they would like swing back into an extra point if they didn't like the look that they got. Uh, they must have liked the look the first time. Then UNC figured whatever out, so they just kicked it after that. Um, after going up 28-0 in the first half, you probably remember this from watching at the house. The I can't remember the receiver, his name, but he was celebrating. It didn't seem like anything egregious, but he's rubbing it in a little bit. And then the announcers were like, "There's just no celebrating these days, Chaz." And maybe you had to be there, but that absolutely cracked me up. And then last note, Sermon, along with the rest of the offense, was finally able to get a little bit going. He had 171 yards, two touchdowns. Uh, 16 to 24. We did see a bit of Hank Gibbs. I think you called that one. I wasn't sure when you mentioned that might happen, but score one for Ben. Look like he's more of a running threat. I don't know if that's exactly what Lamb's plan is to try to use the two quarterbacks just to their strengths, or how much of that was being against Washington State. Um, so that's something probably to keep an eye on. But I'm sure Sermon is still the guy. I'm sure he's going to get the majority of the snaps moving forward, if not all of them.
Yeah, I would not see any sort of ominous foreshadowing of Sermon not being the guy. He's most certainly the guy. Everybody else behind him is just not ready, and it's just so much more beneficial if they're on a developmental track this year. So the next year, when Sermon does finally graduate for what seems like the seventh year of him playing football, somebody else can come in, compete for the job, take over. Um, Hank Gibbs is very talented as a runner, and man, he's a big lumpy guy that just lowers his shoulder, and it's like, oh, it's cringy. But then you got to remember he comes from Wyoming. uh they recruit basically tight ends for quarterbacks out there, and he can put the ball decently on target. But I think he's just a good change up guy when things are looking stale. Throw him in there. They got to wonder, do we, load the box? Do we come up on him? Is he going to try to do a play action throw over our heads? Like, it's just nice little change up in it. Um, Something I'd like to give a shout out to for the O line is, even though we didn't get as much, uh, protection as we would have liked early on, because Sermon, we saw several 3-and-outs. The run game was just kind of stale early on. Is overall they only allowed 2 sacks, so not bad versus a Power Five. I mean, there was a total of 5 quarterback hurries, and I'm sure that our guys were thrown in the dirt a little bit more than the stat sheet says. But I mean, between that and only 5 tackles for a loss overall, I think that's a pretty good showing. Even though a lot of those collisions were just straight at line of scrimmage, it just counts as a standard tackle. But we can at least rely on our line that we're not just going to open up for business and be like a 24/7 7-Eleven, letting anybody just come through. So it's nice that we had a good showing, not a great showing against a Power Five. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a loss, but it's something the guys can hang their hat on. Is coach was all about improvement, and I think this week, even though it's a terrible score on one side of the scoreboard, 21 and some improvement on the defense is worth being excited about.
Yeah, and the offensive line, it seemed like there's been noted improvement every game. It seems it's hard to take away from this one, but you're right. They looked better. They looked better up front, and it seems like everybody just executed a little better. Um, Maybe saved the secondary, but that's uh, that's kind of its own story. Any other things you want to bring up on the UNC Washington State game before we move on to the rest of the Big Sky and FCS as a whole here?
I just think there is such thing as a good loss, and this wasn't necessarily like a good loss, but it was a good loss in the sense that we got better, and we got better against uh, a decent opponent. I mean, like, sure, we were probably playing second and third string throughout, probably leading up to halftime, right into like start of fourth quarter, and then they were probably playing reserves at that point. But I mean, overall, we played pretty well. The penalties weren't too bad. I mean, 7 for 85, so not great. A little bit more than normal, but I think as far as keeping our composure, that did pretty well as well. So I think overall a good showing. I mean, the second and third string for Washington State is going to be pretty similar to starters across the FCS. So I think overall pretty good showing, and we just gotta figure out how to put more points on the board than the opponents in conference play.
All right. Well, we will be right back. Okay, so let's take a look around the Big Sky this week. There was a couple interesting results. I think pretty obviously led by Sac State upsetting former coach Troy Taylor and Stanford. Uh, Caden Bennett had himself a day in that one, 21 for 33, 279 yards and a touchdown. And he added 13 carries for 100 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Um, that one's exciting. Sac State probably a little extra motivation in this one, playing their old head coach. But you love to see it. Did you get to catch? Did you get to catch much of that one?
No, I didn't get to catch too much of it. Pac-12 network is a fickle thing to get a hold of. That's for sure. Won't
I'm
mind if they
honestly
switch.
impressed that you found it in the first place. So
Right? I was like,
kudos there.
Pac-12 Washington. What is this garbage? Kind of like the Longhorn network. Yeah, that incredibly hard to get a hold of, but once you do, a good quality broadcast. Um, Man, that's just so funny that Troy Taylor started them off with a great road streak. That you saw Stats Perform posted was 11. They get it up to 12 on this. They're going to go into Idaho next week. Trying to keep it to 13. It's just it's ironic justice that they kept their streak going against their old coach. I'm sure lots of hugs, lots to figure out for Troy Taylor, and man, $400,000 payday roughly for Sac State. So who can scoff at that? The game I took a little bit more of a in-depth touch to was Montana versus Ferris State, and it was almost the trap game of the week. Ferris State is no joke. They definitely showed pretty much on all facets that they have the players to compete with most FCS teams. Probably not top 25 necessarily, but they did keep their own against Montana. Um, Really just
Should point out Montana was ranked 11th in the top 25 when they played this game.
maybe a little high. But yeah, it was weird to see someone keeping up with Montana so well. A lot of the mistakes they had were just composure mistakes. They freaked out, made a bad decision, lost 16 yards. I mean, at the end of the game, Ferris State was driving. They converted a 4th and 27 to get down to roughly the 30-yard line. Um, they tried their best, but they went 4 and out on that to try to get a tying score. But this Montana team, it worries me. I mean, Sam Vidlac, I don't know what to do with him. I mean, he's 9 for 15 for 105 and no touchdowns.
I mean, I think Vidlac's fine if they'd let him throw the ball. It feels kind of same old story about this Utah team or about this Montana team that has been for the past couple years. All the fans on Twitter just want him to throw the ball and want Bobby Houck to let him open up the offense a little more.
Right.
I think yeah, the this one was weird because Montana was outgained 285 yards to 189 and 156 to 105 through the air. Um,
And I find it
they're
weird that there's so much pro Montana buzz with they had their this was apparently their largest crowd ever at Wagres Stadium, north of 26,000 in there, nearing 27,000, and there's just so much positivity about the Grizz, and I'm like, why? You guys like sure you won the game, but this is against the D2 national champion. The D2 national champion is saying they could hang with the mid tier of the Big Sky, and all congrats to Ferris State. If they were just a little bit more composed, they could have been on it. Final attendance was 26,978.
and
Drunken,
one Sugar Sean O'Malley.
right? Hey, gotta love the pink afro. That's something. So I mean, at the end of the day, it is a win. Montana is 3-0. They're 11 or 10 in the polls. It's just that's a hell of a game to that's a hell of a performance to have in front of your record crowd. Is just not absolutely smashing a D2 team. Um, yeah, I think Montana's has the most disappointing offense I've seen in the last 7 8 years.
Yeah, it feels like um, every Montana fan I've heard any opinion from has been like sounding the alarm bells about this team and about um, Bobby Houck, really, who he's proven himself to be a great coach, but times change, and I think people think he's a little slow to adapt. But the national media doesn't seem to have those same concerns because you're right. I lied earlier. They were 12th in the top 25 ranking when this game happened, but that still just seems at least 5, 10 spots too high. It's still early and so many things can happen, but that ranking feels as much about the logo as it does about the current team.
I mean, they were 8 points away from booting themselves down to 24. So if Bobby Houck wants to stay in Missoula and not go coach Montana Tech, he needs to do something quick because I had a good game against Utah Tech. We can all say that. But you know who didn't have a good game against Utah Tech is our lovely rivals NAU. Um, boo! What happened? 50-36 in Flagstaff. Well, like, guys, can't have it. Like, go Utah Tech for getting slapped around 2 consecutive weeks in a row, and then bouncing back against a lower Big Sky team and beating them by 2 scores. That is something to hang your hat on.
Yeah, if that's any indication, some of these Big Sky games may get ugly. Uh, hopefully not ones including UNC, but we'll see there. Um, Eastern Washington, that one was interesting. Beaten top 25 Southeastern Louisiana. Um, my big takeaway from this game is I'm just bummed that I have to give Eastern Washington any attention. Like it's exciting because that is another team that can make waves in the conference, but man, wasn't six potential playoff teams enough? Now Eastern Washington's got to come and rear their heads. They were receiving votes in this last week's top 25 poll. So in the one that's out by the time you're listening to this, there's a fair chance that they have cracked that top 25. Um, so I guess we'll get into this a little bit later. But Montana or Eastern Washington, Ben, who would you be more worried about?
Oof. Um, just based off of size, I'd still stick with Montana. I think Eastern Washington's still figuring things out. But I mean, Eastern Washington was able to put up 20 points in the fourth quarter. I mean, this was a back and forth game. You know, we were watching this one on the phone, go back and forth, and once it got to 29, 26 in favor of Southeastern Louisiana, I was worried for him. 5 minutes left, and then you know Eastern turning around, they were able to score 2 times in 8 seconds, thanks to a good offensive drive of 10 plays, 75 yards. Just marching down the field just fine. Kiko Vesperis, he's not amazing, but he gets the job done, and that's at the end of the day, that's all you need is just a little bit of help around you and somebody who gets the job done. And then they capped it off with a cute little 34-yard pick six. So Eastern, they might not be as high quality of a firework as before, but they'll still find ways to beat you as a whole team. And I think that's probably the thing to worry about the most in conference play for everyone else is a good team win. You're not just looking at one guy. You're looking at 22 guys that could hurt you, and they found a way.
Yeah, and they'll have another chance to prove what they're really made of next week, taking on UC Davis. Um, Speaking of UC Davis, they beat Southern Utah in a close one. I wasn't really expecting this one to be that close, but 23-21. This is really the first real game Southern Utah's played, or the first time we've really seen what Southern Utah's made of. So I don't know how really interesting that is, but something to take note of. And then last game, really of note in the conference this week was Idaho at Cal. The Vandals, coming off of an FBS upset over Nevada last week, came rip roaring out of the gates, up 17-0 early on Cal, and then the Golden Bears just kind of took over, finished up 31-17, but still a respectable showing from Idaho. Ultimately, I'm sure pretty disappointing for all those fans, but what any takeaways from that game, Ben?
I think that was kind of startling. We saw it was up 17-0 when we were watching our good old Bears, and we broke out the laptop. We're like, let's see what they're doing. And it was pretty good, but it was a breakdown of fundamentals. Just, Cal started getting in their gear. Things started clicking for them. They weren't getting as disrupted as easily. And then Idaho was just kind of disrupting themselves. We saw a really good play from the Bears, and then we look over, and out of nowhere, you throw what was it, a pass or a scramble, and then all of a sudden the guy's going back 10, 12, 16 yards. Just an absolutely unneeded play, trying way too hard to be a hero. But I mean, at the end of the day, even to put 17 on an FBS, and be up that much, I mean, good for them to be able to do that. Just a little bit lackluster that they went up 17 and then allowed 31. It's kind of like the other. I mean, they did better than Weber. 10 more points on Cal than Weber did on Utah. That game seemed like it was going to be good. It was 7-0 Weber, then it was 7-7, 14. It got to the point where it was kind of hard to watch because the Weber State quarterback was just getting ragdolled and the refs were kind of letting it happen. So that one was hard to watch. The rest of the slate's pretty chalk. Montana State rolled Stetson. We knew that. I mean, Sean Chambers ran for like a 40-yard touchdown straight up the middle. Uh, Pretty standard there. And then UNI, they rolled over Idaho State 41-17. Pretty chalk there. Idaho State trying their best, but not able to hang with the top 25. Cal Poly was down early against Lincoln, D2, Lincoln out of California. That was worrisome. Watching the box score, like, is Cal Poly gonna be able to handle themselves? And they did. They came out 41-20, so good for them.
The
Um,
fact that they're 2-1 just makes me mad.
oh,
Like,
so mad.
there's no reason it should, but no, no, they don't deserve to have a winning record.
I
All
mean,
right, sorry.
Lincoln's campus, like I've looked it up before, and it's a step above a strip mall. It's not exactly high quality at all, but they have some real dogs that come out of there. Always scrappy competition. So good for Cal Poly for getting 21 on them. But yeah, that could have been ugly. Speaking of ugly, why are we
Your
scheduling
favorite
NIA
team.
opponents? Why are we trying to set Big Sky records just because we're crying with Eugene, Oregon money in our tears for Portland State? Bruce, Barney, what are we doing, brother? 91
Yeah,
on North American? That's disgusting. They didn't even score in the fourth quarter.
if you score 90, why don't you just score 120? Like at that
Go
point,
for it.
either why score if you're gonna score over 60? Why not just put up 100?
Just break the scoreboard.
It just feels, yeah, literally make them put like a 0-5 because there aren't three spots on
Exactly.
the scoreboard. Like, go do some six-man football shit.
Yeah, that was disgusting. Pizza over Starbucks. My Northwestern hate will always just
It
brew
only
from
grows.
that. Yeah, it's gonna grow. I mean, gosh, you got gobs of money from Oregon just so you could pay North American a fraction of that to just pistol whip them. Like, no, no. Let's schedule at least D2, brother. Come on now.
Yeah, so kind of speaking of Portland State, let's get into our Big Sky Power rankings this week.
I bet you hated
Um,
me.
I Portland State, Ben, you're a phony. Your hate is not real because you moved them up 4 spots to the number 8 from number 12 to number 8 after that drubbing of North American.
I gave them the 4 spots up just because they got a Big Sky record, and they're not going to get another Big Sky football record for, well, decades at this point.
Touche. Touche. I think the more interesting thing you have in your power rankings is Sac State at number 1 over both Montana State and Idaho. Um, I guess, yeah, probably the most convincing win any Big Sky team has this year. So I understand where you're coming from there. Um, do you think Sac State is the best team in this conference, or do you just think right now they've proved it more than anybody else?
No, Sac State is wonderfully capable to do anything that they want to. Uh, but I treat the power rankings more in the sense of who had the best week. And, the power rankings in my top 25 differ a little bit in the sense of just, who needs to be awarded the best for this week? Like, who's the on top, the sharpest this week? Sac State, by far. We're not going to learn much from Montana State just, absolutely beating Stetson to a pulp. I mean, not going to learn much there, but taking out a life support FBS team. I mean, sure, Stanford's in rough straits right now, but it's impressive. You went in, you didn't falter under the pressure of seeing your good buddy, old coach. They went in there, they absolutely took it to the house. They played better. Their guys were more athletic. They 100% earned that win. I think Montana State's still the best equipped to win this conference, but their schedule worries me.
Honestly, very fair. When I first saw your rankings, my first thought was, "Damn, Ben, these are fluid." Like, because
Yeah.
in every week you've had a good chunk of change, and then I kind of flipped that and was started to wonder if I was too like strict in my preseason thinking still, and I think I'm starting to waver towards your side. I think a good kind of example of that is you moved Eastern Washington up to fifth ahead of UC Davis and Montana. I still have them at seventh, but the more I thought about it, even at 1 and 2, they probably have the most impressive resume in the Big Sky. They took Fresno State to 2 overtimes, has been the best test that North Dakota State's seen this year, and then a win last week. So I guess tip of the cap to you, Ben. And honestly, from what I've seen, Eastern Washington does seem better than Montana. Um, like you said earlier, Montana may still be in a better spot in the Big Sky, just physicality and size wise. But I think it may be a top 7 in that first tier instead of the 6 that we kind of originally thought.
Ooh, that's spicy. I definitely like that. Yeah, my rankings are definitely fluid. I mean, I would say, I like to make my coffee with coffee creamer, not coffee powder. So they're gonna go up and down. I take it in the sense of who's the best team this week. If Sac State and Montana State played based off of what we saw uh, in their 2 games respectively, I would give Sac State the edge. But as a whole, it might differ a little bit. You know, just because I'm breaking down Mr. Sugar Cube, breaking down your strong, solid structure of, got to stay strong. Like it's the best of both worlds. If you have a sugar cube and a little bit of creamer in your coffee, ain't nothing wrong with that. I think Eastern deserves a lot of respect for how much better they've gotten and how much better. they are in the passing game that we might have thought. Kiko Vesperis, he looked good against us last year, but it was, there was a lot of like hesitation. There were some decisions that weren't the greatest. He's still tweaking and getting better at improving some things, but I think overall, Eastern Washington versus Montana passing wise, I'd take Eastern Washington all day long.
First off, your phrases are just killing it tonight. I wasn't sure where you were going when you called me Mr. Sugar Cube, but you landed the plane. Um, but I like your thinking there because that makes sense. Which team like showed me the most this week, and obviously UNC is probably not jumping from like 10-1, but I think I need to kind of open my parameters up a little more when I do this next. Um, Northern Arizona looked awful. They dropped in both of ours. You have them dead last. I have them second to last. Um,
Dead
Other
last is
than
where
that,
they deserve to be if they're going to lose to Utah Tech that badly. I mean, even if we played, I'm not saying that we win. I don't think we lose by 14 though.
luckily, uh, luckily we do get to play all those bottom four that or yeah, the other bottom three that kind of or no other bottom four that are kind of rotating down there with us. Luckily, they are all four on UNC's schedule this year. So we'll kind of get to see how that back half of the conference shakes out. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
any other Big Sky teams do anything of note before we move on, or what was it you were gonna say? Sorry.
oh, I was just saying it'll be a good time for us if top five Portland State, not really, shout out Tubbs of the club. Um, if we get to end the year with Portland State and Northern Arizona the way they look now, oh,
Hey,
that'll be a
91 to nothing,
dreamboat.
bud.
Say that again.
91 to nothing, bud. Put some respect.
Oof, yeah. Try playing an NCAA sanctioned team. Oof. But yeah, those last 2 weeks looking at NAU and Portland State just look better. I hope that both of them stay healthy, but have an awful season so we can just roll them at the end of the season. Uh, Looking at everybody else, Cal Poly, still don't know what to do with them. They're a floater. I think, like you said, it might be the teams that are taking the season seriously and are equipped for it and at running at least half speed, if not close to full speed, is probably year 1 through 7. Portland State, Cal Poly, Idaho State, NAU, and UNC. I think we're all just kind of figuring it out and figuring out how we get to the pace of everybody else.
Yeah, and even though there are two definitive tiers, if you want to say that for lack of a deeper analogy, it feels like the Big Sky will be competitive because of that. Not necessarily just in spite of it, because I think those top 6 or 7, there will be a lot of toss-up games in there. Like I think just about maybe put Montana State a little bit in a league of their own, but I think just about any of those teams can beat any of those others, and then same with like the bottom five. I think really UNC, Portland State. I don't think either team's going to be more than like a 3 or 4 point favorite in that one, and same with any of those bottom five matchups. I think there are going to be some interesting games across the conference all year.
Well, and speaking of interesting, is the top four all play each other this week. You know, Idaho and Sac
Oh
State are
yeah,
going to clash in Moscow, and then Montana State and Weber they're going to duke it out over in Ogden. So uh, our power rankings might be all over the board next week. Who knows what
we
kind of scrambled egg omelet we're going to have.
have. It'll be nice to have some easy ones to put ahead of others.
That's true.
Uh, Sweet. Well, let's before we get too much into next week, let's finish up with rest of the FCS for week 3. I think Southern Illinois, Southeastern Missouri was probably the best game. It was the only top 25 matchup, and it didn't disappoint. A 1 point game. Game-winning touchdown for Southern Illinois with 11 seconds left. Uh, QB Nick Baker had himself a game too. 458 yards, 3 touchdowns. Um, I'm honestly bummed I didn't get to catch any of this one live because it seems like it was an exciting one.
Hey, good thing ESPN Plus has on demand. They should sponsor us. Look at us, ESPN Plus. But
We will.
yeah, I mean that one was a nail biter for sure. And then a lot of people didn't think it, but Incarnate Word, Abilene Christian, that came out pretty close. I mean, we got to see both of those, one in person, one against our team for far too many plays. And they duked it out, and both of them look pretty legit. Incarnate Word obviously had the upper hand, but I think Abilene Christian, they're gonna play a game next week against Central Arkansas. They only lost by a couple scores to North Dakota State. That could be an interesting one to keep an eye on.
I will die on the Abilene Christian Hill after that week 1 game. If Abilene Christian has 10 fans, I am one of them. And if Abilene Christian has no fans, I am no longer here because I will defend them to the grave this year. A couple others we took a look at. Holy Cross, 49, Yale 24. First game of Yale's season. Not exactly an easy one with Holy Cross. And then Auburn just smoked Samford 45-13. I don't think that was a surprise to just about anybody. Um, and then a note that I found interesting is that the Southland Conference is 3-19 as a whole this year, and Incarnate Word at 2-1 has two of those three wins. So I don't know if I expect Incarnate Word to face too much of a challenge in the next handful of weeks.
Yeah, the Southland, they really got rated. I mean, when the WAC conference was coming up, and now the WAC Sun United, whatever dumpster fire, wholesale American Airlines logo they come out with, it doesn't matter. That conference is a dumpster fire, and with teams jumping ship to that, and then also Sam Houston State moving up to the FBS right before it gets 5 times more expensive. It's kind of hard. The Southland, they kept their structure. They're going to stay intact, and they're not going to die like the Pac-12. But boy, howdy, it was not far from it. So I mean, good for them for sticking together as a conference. But geez, maybe we look at who we schedule for out of conference. Maybe a couple D2s that aren't like Angelo State, West Texas A&M. How about we
in
like,
7 years in 7 years there's going to be such an overcorrection that the Southland's going to be like 21-3 in non-conference play because they're just playing they're just scheduling D2 teams.
hey, that's not a bad way to go. You got to get in the top 25 somehow.
Gain that momentum. um, all right, well, let's take another break here. Before we come back, we'll look at UNC versus Idaho State next week and then take a look around the rest of the Big Sky. All right, so Idaho State, 0-3, much like UNC. Honestly, a lot of parallels to the Bears with Idaho State here. Also, first year head coach, um, Cody Hawkins in his first year, stepping out from under Papa Hawkins's wings. And he's looked like he's had him ready to play. They put up a really good fight in week 1 against San Diego State. Last couple weeks, they've come back down more to where I think everybody expected them. They lost 78-28 against Utah State and then 41-17 against Northern Iowa. But uh, this was probably the rebuild in the Big Sky. Obviously, there's a few new coaches taking over teams that haven't had a ton of success. But this felt like when Charlie Rago left after last year, This program was kind of in the dumps. And honestly, kudos so far. It seems like what Cody Hawkins has done has been working, and that team's shown a lot of fight. What are your kind of general thoughts on Idaho State, Ben?
You know, they're looking out to be exactly what Cody promised. You mentioned at Big Sky Media Days and in all of his interviews that he promised he was going to throw, and they're throwing. They're not running the ball worth a darn, but they are, by golly, throwing it. I mean, just looking at the stats, it's worrisome how much they do throw because like if they get that cooking against us, that'll be a little bit discerning. But their running through 3 games is only 151 yards. For comparison on that, our totals through 3 games is 335. And we didn't really figure it out till the third game. But I mean, they're rushing. They don't even have that many attempts in there. They are doing exactly as Cody said. They're doing kind of a weird 2 quarterback system. Hunter Hayes definitely has it a little bit more figured out than Jordan Cook does. Jordan Cook coming out of Santa Rosa, California, pretty cool because wife grew up 2 towns south of there, down in Petaluma.
Nice.
So every time I see Santa Rosa, popping up, that seems to be kind of a hotbed right now for recruiting and just wild like athletically gifted guys. So, Coach Lamb, maybe we need to stop by Petaluma, Santa Rosa, all those guys over there. But yeah, I mean, they're going for it. I wouldn't say the passing game is super successful because I mean, they do have 963 yards on the year. Um, but Jordan Cook has a -2 ratio for his touchdowns to interceptions with 2 touchdowns and 4 interceptions on the year. Hunter Hayes is doing much better. He's got a 4-1 with 4 touchdowns to 1 interception. But like you said, like 2 of those came in garbage time in his last game. So I mean, yeah, just looking at it, like they do have some scary receivers because they got some good size. They're definitely producing 2 pretty worrisome ones with Christian Fredrickson. Um,
Good
so,
luck.
yeah, I was gonna
Shed
say
on, Shedden, Shaden, Shaden is my guess. Final
I'm
answer.
gonna guess Shaden James. Yeah, that's a good one there. Let me see if there's a pronunciation key. Probably not.
While
Um,
you're looking that up, you mentioned the size. I think Fredrickson's really going to be the one to look out there because both Incarnate Word and Washington State were able to kind of just throw over some of our corners. Um, and if, yeah, Fredrickson's 6'4", it's going to be hard. We're going to have to look out for him in the red zone. Um, but I wonder how much of Idaho State's lack of success in the run game is just they straight up don't care,
I mean
because
that could be.
they haven't put up a ton of rush yards, but also their running backs are getting single digit carries, and half of their run plays are scrambles. Um, but like you mentioned a couple times, Hawkins came in and said we're going to throw the ball. There are a lot of programs pretty close to us who get it done running the ball, and we play indoors 7 times a year. Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how UNC stacks up against that because it didn't really look like it last week, but I think the secondary is kind of the strength of this defense. And especially if Hogue is able to come back and they can generate a little pressure up front without having to blitz, I think it could match up fairly favorable for UNC in that regard. But then on the flip side, we have seen this defense give up some big plays over the top, and if they're going to throw it 60 times a game, there's a lot of chances for missed coverages and broken assignments.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, looking at their roster, they only have 6 running backs on their roster. No pronunciation key, but we do know that Shaden James' favorite thing to do is play Call of Duty. So, shout out Kyler Murray.
Relatable.
Hopefully, he doesn't watch his film this week. But yeah, I mean, I think that's it's not that they're recklessly abandoning it. I think they're just bold faced telling us we're not going to run unless we see something good. And I guess
I
they don't
respect
have
it.
to.
I mean,
Yeah, I guess they don't have to if their receivers are going to ball out. But at the same time, like with kind of like some garbage time touchdowns, San Diego State just kind of being a little bit more down than we thought, and that kind of being reflected in their other games that they played, where like Utah State, like they're not exactly cream of the crop, and they hung an extra 50 on them. Northern Iowa, they're up and down, but they're still respectably a top 25 team, and they boat raced them. So it's hard to see how we shouldn't just focus on the secondary and maybe give the linebackers a little bit more of coverage assignments this week. Maybe split it 50-50. Somebody goes back in coverage, maybe send Napke back in an extra third, and send Vincent King Vincent King down for some pass rush. Um, we've really been bad at that all season, so this will be a premium time for us to step up the pass rush. Hopefully, we get David Hogue back. This seems like a fantastic time for him to come back because the quarterback's going to be back there, 80% of the game. So this gives a perfect time for us to step that up. There's going to be plenty of reps against the O lineman to try to get back and just hammer the quarterback. I don't see why you wouldn't necessarily just kind of buy into it. I don't think it's a trap. I think it's just buy into they're going to try to just outpass you.
yeah, and I wonder. Yeah, Hogue would could honestly be just a giant difference maker, because I wonder how much they will be able to just pin their ears back and get after the quarterback, because they throw it around a lot. But I mean, part of what goes with that is you have to almost use the pass game as your run game, set up little screens, quick hitters, to just so the defense can't just simply get after the quarterback. Um, so I wonder how much time the ball is going to be in that backfield for Idaho State, and how much time UNC's pass rush will really have to get home. San Diego State got 3 sacks. Utah State had 2, and then Northern Iowa had 4, which really aren't terrible numbers with how much they're throwing the ball. So that offensive line versus UNC's defensive line will be a pretty key matchup for sure.
Yeah, it'll be
Um,
interesting to see what we do with it. I mean, looking at it as who leads us is our linebackers are pretty much leading the way, tackling wise. Um, we got Dustin Johnson technically leading us overall in the stats at 20 tackles. Him and Vincent King are both tied, and we got a lot of secondary. And it's not until we get about seven or eight down, that we finally see a D lineman in there. Redshirt sophomore Joe Brown, number 98, big boy, 6'7", 314. But yeah, we got to go down pretty far to start seeing all of where the D line is at, and it would just be nice to see the D line really get in there and do more. I'm sure Nick Norris and Joe Brown are trying their best, but really they've been taken out of these first 3 games that we've had. I mean, Nick Norris was a huge contributor for us the last 2 years, and I
I
mean
do think a part of that has been the fact that Incarnate Word and Washington State do throw the ball so much. I feel like that just generally limits the number of tackles a defensive lineman's going to get. And I bet that's honestly probably gonna keep up with Idaho State, with if you're not getting a sack or kind of a tackle on a rush into a screen. I think a lot of those are just naturally going to go to linebackers in secondary.
right. I think there's something to that. I mean, we only have 2 sacks on the entire year, and we've faced teams that were above us, not necessarily the same weight class as us per se. So I mean, 2 sacks on the year.
Bingo, yeah.
Tackles for loss were a little bit better in, but just overall the linebackers. and the secondary dominantly are just all over it in that. And I mean, like, secondary is only one to get interceptions, forced fumbles. One came from Christian Wren where he just absolutely ripped it out of the quarterback's hand, which is fantastic. But then our other forced fumble is Cam Murray. So our defensive backs, the secondary, they're pulling strong for us. The linebackers are trying to back them up, and I'm sure the D line's trying, but it's hard to see on the stat sheet where they're at because they're just effectively been taken out of the game the last 3 games.
And I think if those stats do kind of actually tell the story of talent on this UNC team, that probably does bode well for the Bears because that secondary and those linebackers are going to be the ones getting attacked this week.
Yeah, and hopefully,
Awesome.
God forbid, if we do have to punt, that Hunter Green can do another 70-yard punt. Um, that was pretty cool to see at the UIW game. Yeah, we're gonna need to win all 3 phases, but the defensive phase is gonna be heavily, um, on the linebackers and secondary. And thankfully, that's who's seen action this season.
Yeah, and I think both teams will probably be. I guess Idaho State, the game against San Diego State was fairly competitive, but that one I think was pretty decided, even though it was only 8 points. But I think both teams will be excited to get out there and compete in a way where they can see a result. See those numbers on the scoreboard, be close to each other, and really have something to play for as the game comes down. Couple notes I had. Idaho State, we kind of touched on this second coach in as many years after Charlie Raggle bolted to Arizona State before this season. Um, UNC and Idaho State have played 12 times since 2006, which is exactly as far back as the UNC website tracks. The Bears are 7-5 against Idaho State. I bet there's probably not that many FCS teams out there that UNC has a winning record against. So hopefully they can add to that. They won last year 35-14 in probably the most convincing conference win of the McCaffrey era. Um, Idaho State's last win was 2014, though that's a little bit misleading because they played every year from 2006 to 2014. And then I believe that the Big Sky got a shakeup that year. So then they've kind of switched up the schedule to where everybody doesn't play everybody. Um, and then home teams are 5-2 in this one, which bodes well for Idaho State. Uh, Not sure how much we can take from any of those, but a few fun facts are always interesting before a game. Anything I just said there stand out to you?
Uh, Definitely that we have a winning record against them. That's something we should deep dive into because I mean, I really can't think of any. I think we're probably at a losing with UC Davis, even though first homecoming we had was 56-27 against them. That was pretty fun. But I don't
Abilene
think we're doing
Christian, we might have a winning record against, if I remember. Just random ones where we've played like three
right.
times or something.
Yeah, we'd
But
we'd have to look a little harder than we want to. That's for sure. Just perusing through their defense a little bit, uh, it seems pretty similar production wise. They have one more sack than we do, one less interception. I mean, they only have one interception on the year, and they have one more forced fumble than we do. So I mean, production wise, it's looking pretty similar across the board. Um, they got 2 guys in the 20s for tackles, and then it kind of trails off into the a few teens, and then starts into the sevens. So I think this is a good matchup for us. This will really set the tone. I mean, I I have a hard time like not being a homer in the sense of if Tywone and Tizzy play well and Dustin and Cam don't let anything over the top, I think this is going to be extremely competitive, if not uh, a pretty good win for the Bears.
Well, don't give anything away yet, cause we gotta save it for that shiny new segment we're gonna do here in a sec. Um, which I guess last thing I wanted to shout out, couple things. There are a couple defensive players to keep an eye on. Cornerback Josh Alford, safety Calvin Pitcher, and defensive lineman Cortland Horton. Just a few names to keep an eye out for when UNC and Idaho State face off. Shout out to the Jungle Land podcast for kind of giving us some Idaho State info. Um, yeah, so is if there's not anything else you want to say about Idaho State, Ben, you want to move on to our Big Sky picks for this week?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Awesome. So now that conference play is starting, we figured we'd try to do something kind of fun, something to keep track of through the season. So we're just gonna pretty simple. We'll pick every Big Sky game, and those will all be worth 1 point. We'll deem one FCS game of the week. Bunch of weeks it'll probably be a Big Sky game just by the nature, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Spoiler: this week it is. So just something fun to do, keep track of throughout the season. Ben didn't agree to this, but if I win, he has to throw me a pizza party.
And if I win, you gotta throw me a taco party.
All right, deal. But awesome. So yeah, let's go. Feels natural to start at UNC versus Idaho State. We've already broken it down. You kind of hinted at where you were going. So what are your thoughts on that game? Who do you have coming out on top?
God, it's a battle of the 0 and 3s, and there's no ties allowed in football. So, yeah, gonna go UNC. I mean, I know this is going to be new territory for Ed Lamb with his potentially first win for the Bears, but I think we're well equipped, and if we can limit that passing game, I don't see them being a big threat on the ground. If our passing game gets limited, we switch to Hank Gibbs, we switch to David Afari, our running back committee, and we just really ground and grind with them. And all comes worse, we just do play action the whole game and throw it to Alec Pell. So I think there's just more variety in our approach, and that we have similar defenses, so there's not really any separation there. So it's all going to be about can the can a more diverse offense beat a sunken concrete passing game.
Yeah. Hopefully this isn't a theme, but I have to agree with you. Um, I think we basically have to pick UNC here because this is probably going to be the Bears' best chance of winning. We talked about they probably have 4 games that they have a chance in, but I think just this is this is one of the best, if not the best game. And it feels like the matchup favors UNC with the way Idaho State wants to throw the ball and the defensive line of UNC being kind of a weakness in the secondary, a bit of a strength. Um, so yeah, we both have UNC in that one. We'll see, like you mentioned, if Ed Lamb can get his first win, the Bears' first win of the year. Yeah, let's move into some of the heavy hitters this weekend. First off, we got Montana State at Weber State. One of those top 4 matchups in conference that you mentioned. Both 2-1 with losses against good programs. Weber lost to Utah this weekend. Montana State lost a crushing one to South Dakota State last week. What are your thoughts on this one?
You know, I think this one and a certain other one we'll talk about later that's going to be our game of the week. I think it's really a coin flip. I don't I don't want to pick against the home team, but I'm gonna have to pick Montana State because I think they just have. Again, it's going to be similar reasoning to the UNC game. Is that Montana State? They might not specialize in passing, but they're able to pass just a little bit better than Weber State. I feel like their quarterback committee is a little bit more talented, a little bit more diverse. Weber State, you know, they were in that game with Utah early on, and then their quarterback started getting ragdolled, whether it was fair or not, and the composure and the shape of their offense just broke down immediately. So I think if Montana State gets Sebastian Valdez in that backfield and throws him around a little bit, and they have to rely on their workhorse running backs, it's going to be grit versus grit, and Montana State's better at that.
Yeah, I think Weber State has shown they're a tough team. They're disciplined. They're good, quite frankly. But until proven otherwise, I think Montana State's still in a tier of their own in this conference. And I know it's in Utah, but I think the Bobcats are just they're just a step better than Weber State. So I'm also going with Montana State in that one. We're 2 for 2 together here. This isn't looking great so far, especially since those were two of the more toss ups. So let's go into Eastern Washington at UC Davis. Kind of different styles at play here. Also different kind of ways they've reached this point. UC Davis, one of those top like 3 to 6 teams, 2 to 6 teams in the Big Sky in the preseason. And Eastern Washington, I think people were expecting to have a bit of another down year. Um, but they're probably in a comparable spot right now. So what are your thoughts on this one?
I hate picking the first week of conference because it's always such a crapshoot. Um, this one we're gonna differ on. Um, I'm going Eastern Washington. I'm drinking the Kool Aid. Um, I think just based on, I think my first week picks are going to be based a lot on momentum. UC Davis,
Very
yeah,
fair.
just like tried and true Dan Hawkins, they are a good team, but they have a little bit of that roller coaster right now. They got to right themselves. They got to get their sea legs. But I think the Seabirds are just a little bit better mind state right now because they came out, they beat a pretty good southeastern Louisiana team. They might be in another transitional year, as you would say, because they don't have Cole Kelly anymore. Eastern doesn't have Eric Berrier anymore. Kind of just a different approach for both of them, and it still turned out to be a good game. And Eastern gritted it out. It was a nice team win. They topped it off with a pick six at the end. Even though they knew they had the win, they topped it off with a little extra on there. So I'm gonna say Eastern Washington just on the fact of momentum, and they have a little bit more continuity throughout their year so far.
Okay, very fair, very fair. As you're going off of momentum, I am going off a mix of vibes and what I would prefer to happen. So, so UC Davis all the way for me. Um, like you said, it's hard to pick this first week of conference play, so I'm not going to pretend like I have a real strong reason. Um, I kind of like I like this UC Davis team. Miles Hastings, a junior this year, he hasn't done a ton so far, but I think he's poised to kind of to break not break out, but he's poised. He can go off at any time. Just a solid team at UC Davis. I think Hawkins will have them ready. They're going to do what they're going to do, and I think it'll be enough. But this one's exciting because I'm glad we have one at least that we're going to veer on.
I think it'll
Um,
be a
be,
good game. I just don't know what to expect of UC Davis's run game in conference. Relying on Ulonzo Gilliam for so long of just one of the best rushers we've seen in the conference in a long time. I don't know if Miles Hastings, if the game's on his shoulders, if he's able to shoulder that. I think Kiko Vesperis is just a little bit better suited for the pressure, and not necessarily more talented. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think Washington State is gonna have to get some shirts of Chris hates my state. And Oregon's gonna have to get Ben hates my state shirts, just like Sam Herder hates my team type shirts.
we'll print those up, put them up for sale on the website. Um, But yeah, I will admit that Southern Utah, it was a win for UC Davis, but that one worried me a bit. I don't know what to really make of it since they've only Southern Utah's played two FBS teams. Um, so I will not talk about it any longer. Um, in our little Google Doc for outline, I just labeled these two games under fart noise. So first of those two is going to be Montana at Northern Arizona. Um, I don't think either of us have been particularly impressed with what we've seen out of Montana, but I wouldn't really say I've been impressed with anything I've seen out of Northern Arizona either. So take as much time or as little as you want on this one. What do you think?
I am so happy this game is happening, and you know why, Chris?
Why?
Somebody has to lose.
I
Yeah,
love it.
Montana. We're nowhere near their tier. They have a godlike tier of just facilities and whatnot up there. Northern Arizona has a great little situation in Flagstaff, but Chris Ball has been dropping the ball since he's moved over. Supposed to be the defensive guru, and there's nothing guru like about it. I mean, they had that really great corner who's now playing for the Lions, that uh, Khalil Dorsey, I believe. They had a couple corners move on to the NFL, but I mean, other than just pure raw talent, I haven't seen a lot come out of Northern Arizona other than Case Cookus, and that was 7 years ago. So I think Montana takes it pretty easily.
I will save us all some time and just say I also think Montana takes this one easily. I also don't think it's going to be as close as that Ferris State game. Um, what that means, who knows? Probably not that much. But this one, I think we may differ on this one just out of this will be a conflicting vibes pick for sure. We have Cal Poly heading up to Portland State, top five Portland State. um, who do you got in this one, Ben?
Now, are you just saying Portland State can't win a game just because I hate them? Because I mean, it's not wrong, but um, I don't believe in either of these teams. I don't want to pick this one. I don't want to know what the score is because these teams are just at such a weird crossroads for both of them. Um, I guess a high school stadium is going to see Cal Poly lose. That's where I'm at.
Ooh,
Is I don't have rhyme or reason to really bank on either of them. Cal Poly's been trying their best, with FBS burnouts for quarterbacks, and Portland State. I'm sure they're trying, but it's hard to see. I'm just gonna go with the home team on this one, just out of pure fact that I don't believe in either of them. I think 17-31 against Wyoming is a pretty good showing, especially since Wyoming, uh, the box score is worse than it was, but they kept pace with Texas for 3 quarters. So I'd like to say that that's a good loss for them per se. Um,
I'd say so,
I
honestly.
mean, with Cal Poly, like nothing on their schedule impresses me. They beat a San Diego team that lost to Colorado Mesa. Go Mavs! They got absolutely shellacked by San Jose State, 3-59, and they were behind Lincoln for a while, and Lincoln's D2. So I mean, welcome back Mustangs. I don't think so. I think be concerned for the Mustangs.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with pretty much everything you said. Um, I really expected, since I figured you didn't believe too much in either of these teams, that your hatred for the Pacific Northwest would shine through, and you would take Cal Poly. But I'm with you. I think Portland State. Um,
I
nothing they've
think
done
I
is
think Cal Poly
necessarily.
and Montana still they need to be on the watch list for fraud alert. If they keep on playing the way they do, they need to be put on a no fly list for wins because wherever they go, they better be changing their attitude. Otherwise, it's not going to be a win.
Yeah, I will drive the Cal Poly our frauds train. Though I don't know how many people are necessarily questioning that. I don't think a lot of people think they're really as good as their 2-1 record says. Not that it's too deep into the season, or as their 2-1 record. Um, I bet all you lovely people are like, but guys, you forgot one of the biggest games, if not the biggest game of the Big Sky slate this week. And what to that I say, no, we didn't. So Ben, Sac State going into Utah or going into Idaho. Don't know what I'm. I think that's the second time I've done that, which is weird because those two states don't really seem like I should mix them up. But Sac State, Idaho, the probably the teams with the two most convincing wins in the Big Sky this year. Um, and quite frankly, this one feels like a toss up to me. There's been a couple that have seemed like pick'ems, but I really, just off the top of my head, I don't know which way I was leaning before I thought about it. So hit me with your takes on Idaho Sac State.
I think toss up is a good way to put it. This is going to be a game of moments. If I had to pick anything, it's going to be a game of moments, just in the sense of uh, whoever comes out with it is just going to have a few better plays, a few less mistakes than the other. Um, Gosh, I don't want to say it. I don't want to, but go Hornets. Um,
Ooh, okay.
I think if the streak didn't die, playing against their coach that left them for the FBS, um, I think if any time is a good time to get 13 wins in a row on the road, this is the best time. Uh, they've got a good roster overall. Really, nothing about the roster is uh, off-putting or disappointing. Really, they just keep on being good despite all factors that they shouldn't be good. Idaho, they have probably one of the most talented offenses in the entire FCS landscape as a whole. Definitely the best receiving room, you know, at worst, top three receiver room in the whole FCS. Um, but yeah, Sac State, they're just a complete team. I don't have any worries about what they can or can't do. And at this point in time, I think Idaho just kind of breaking down at Cal, not necessarily that that's a confidence herder in any way, but they had a secure lead and then they gave it away and never scored again. Um, I'm just gonna have to roll with the Hornets on this one.
I'm glad that you went with the Hornets because I think my gut was telling me Idaho, um, and that's probably because of my unwillingness to change my opinions from the preseason till now. Really, I just think Idaho's a little bit better. I very well could be proven wrong. I think they're a little more explosive, like you mentioned. They have the weapons. Giovanni McCoy, Hayden Hatton. Like you said, Hayden Hatton's not the only probably number one receiver that they have. Um, but I think this one's gonna be fun to watch. I don't have a great reason for why I think the Vandals are gonna win this. But I'm gonna go with Idaho, which is good because that means of these 6 games we disagree on 2 of them. So we will we don't have to have a different record, but we will not have the exact same record. Chances are, at least.
On points wise,
Um.
that'll give us a 3 point swing one way or
Oh,
another. So
you're right. You're
that
right.
that'll
We
be
got
fun.
that worth. Let me note in the Google Doc that this is worth 2 because I already forgot.
Yeah, I was gonna
All
say,
right.
just looking at it, like Caden Bennett, it's all gonna depend on him. But I think if he does have a good day, he's just gonna keep on keeping that momentum. I mean, I don't see why they don't. Marshall Martin, big time receiver for him. I think it's going to be strength versus strength, and we're going to see a good game.
Yeah. I honestly I agree wholeheartedly, and it'll be nice to have bragging rights over you next week.
Hey, then you'll
So
have to admit that the spuds got you there. The potatoes were right.
touche. I've already dropped that take, so I'm full aboard the Idaho train. But awesome. We'll keep track of those. We'll get a running tally starting next week. Um, but yeah, let's move on to the FCS before we wrap up here. Yeah, we're sitting at just under an hour and a half. Again, like it's probably going to be occasionally throughout the season, the Big Sky kind of has the most interesting slate of games, especially Sac State, Idaho, and Montana State, Weber State. Even that Eastern Washington UC Davis game is probably in contention. Outside of that, it looks conference plays starting all over the country, so we have some familiar faces going up against each other. Probably the most interesting of those is Mercer is at Furman, Southern Conference matchup. That one's top 25. Both will likely be in the top 20 when the new batch of rankings come out. Um, then we have New Hampshire at Delaware. That's a Colonial Conference. And then also Rhode Island at Villanova. Those are the other three top 25 matchups we're looking at. Do any of those in particular stick out, or any thoughts on those, Ben?
I think it's just a good chance for all those teams to kind of plant their flag and make a big statement. I mean, Mercer Furman, we always see those guys in the top 25, and it's, does do they belong? The CAA is all over the place since James Madison left and went to dominate the Fun Belt. It's kind of like who's going to be the next one to take over. They got a lot of blue bloods in that conference. It'll just be a good way for all those teams to kind of set the tone for their landscape, and just those guys are just a little bit more in the driver's seat than everybody else in their conference.
Yeah, and so I was trying to look it up real quick while you were talking. Was it Abilene Christian that had another interesting one? Oh yeah,
Yeah,
they play.
Abilene Christian and Central Arkansas square off. Abilene Christian just kind of one of those weird, tough teams that's playing a little bit above their belt, kind of getting more stable, getting to be more of a consistently good team. And then Central Arkansas, they've seen flashes over the last couple of years of being someone to take notice of, even leading up to playoff time. So I mean, they only lost by a few scores to North Dakota State. Had a pretty strong showing for what you can against a top five team. So I think that could be kind of a sneaky unranked game that matters a little bit more than we think.
Yeah, and both of those teams receiving votes in this last batch of polls. Even with two losses, I don't expect that to really change. They both played top 10 teams. Are there any other FCS games that you have an eye on? I don't think there are any. At least I didn't see any FBS matchups, and if there weren't any that were too particularly interesting.
Those ones definitely peak it. I mean, gosh, I really hope this is wrong, but I see UIW is playing North American. Um,
Oh,
they
I
better
did see
score.
that.
They better score 92 to nothing.
How do you approach that? That's a story for another, or a conversation for another podcast. Um,
Technically, there is a technical FBS game of Kennesaw State playing Tennessee
ah,
Tech. Even though Kennesaw has been very down this year, more losses than I think anybody else would expect. Um, Kind of the narrative of them moving up prematurely is definitely picking up steam. But we saw that with um, Jacksonville State, and they've righted the ship with Rich Rod up in the FBS. So they're going to need to have a good win against Tennessee Tech, because if they lose to them, that's red flags that it needs to just be cleaned house there for sure.
all right. Well, that is all I have. Anything else, Ben, before we sign off here?
No, I think the bread and butter is definitely in the Big Sky this week with two massive matchups that's going to shake up the top four. and the ones we highlighted in the Southern Conference and the CAA. That's going to set the tone and really have those guys in the driver's seat going forward. Anything can happen the rest of the season, but once you set the tone, that's the cards you're dealt with, and you gotta play up to that level.
Awesome. Well, as always, please rate, review, subscribe. If you listen on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube. If you listen on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music. All the things help that algorithm out. We really appreciate you listening. This has been Bear Claw Media Podcast. I'm Chris, joined by Ben. Have a great rest of your day.